Hey, this is Whitney Kurtz Ogilvy. I am your senior lecturer and academic writing specialist here at the College of Nursing, and I am going to talk to you today about making peer review work. Now, I originally designed this presentation for fellow faculty, but I think it's very relevant for graduate students as well because so many of you guys are going to be TAing and so many of you will end up teaching, once you get into your careers. So I think everybody will find this useful. Honestly, there's some really good advice and some really good tips on just developing better critical thinking as well in here. So let's get started. My main source for this presentation was a wonderful book that I suggest everybody read by John Bean, and it's called Engaging Ideas, The Professor's Guide to Integrating Writing, Critical Thinking, and Active Learning in the Classroom, and it is just absolutely terrific. I could not recommend it enough. I think the most recent edition is the second edition. Terrific book. Please read it. So why is using peer review a good idea in the first place? Well, there are a lot of benefits to it. It encourages people to collaborate, which in scientific writing is huge, obviously. It's a very good way to help your students hone their editing and revision skills, and that's not just editing other people's work. They'll take those skills and use them on their own work as well, so they can be better self-editors. So it encourages you to read very carefully with attention to detail. Obviously, another great benefit is that it saves you time as an instructor and really helps students to develop the writing process and to understand that, you're not just plopping down one draft and then turning it in, that writing is really a thinking process and multiple drafts are a key part of that. But when you're teaching a course, it's really difficult to maintain that because, you have so many students and so much time. So it doesn't require you as the instructor to give extensive feedback. You can kind of look at what the peer reviewers are saying to each other and respond in a more global way so that you don't have to spend so much time, going line by line editing student drafts. And then the other thing is that it really helps for students to understand that they're writing for a real audience, not just for the teacher, which is so important, especially at the graduate level. So that's a lot of really good reasons to do it. There's a classic study in writing and rhetoric by Guilford from 2001 that showed a lot of really great benefits to peer review. 90% of the participants in that study found peer review very helpful and felt it improved their writing. And the mean score on the final paper in the course that was used in that study improved from 85 to 93% from the previous year that didn't have any peer review. So pretty clear benefits there. There are some barriers, though, to effective peer review, and when it's done badly, it can actually do more harm than good. So we want to make sure we address those barriers. One of those is discomfort with passing judgment on other people's work. So students might think, well, who am I? I'm not, an expert writer or anything. Who am I to pass judgment on somebody else's paper? Then there's often uncertainty about how to give constructive feedback, how to evaluate other people's work. What do I say, And so a lot of times you get just this really bland, like, oh, it was great. And then people maybe edit each other's grammar a little bit, and then it'll stop at that, which isn't very helpful. They might think that only the teacher's opinion really matters, which of course is back to learning how to write for a real audience. And then there might be some uncertainty about how to apply the suggestions that their peers are giving to them. So those are all barriers to effective peer review that we have to address. So what are the basics of constructive, effective peer review? Well, the first and most important thing, and this may surprise everybody because the first thing people want to do is get in there and line edit each other's grammar, because honestly that's the easiest thing to do. It's easier to see that somebody's put an apostrophe in the wrong place than it is to get in there and get your hands dirty and talk about their critical thinking process and but good peer review should be focused on the content of the paper and the organizational flow of the paper, not at all on the grammar and mechanics. Students should not be line editing each other at all. It's not helpful. It's not teaching them anything. If the grammar is a mess, then that should absolutely be addressed. You can just tell your peer, your grammar is a real issue in this. I had trouble reading it. Sometimes you need to fix your grammar. But they don't need to get in there and line edit each other's work. So the other basic of constructive peer review is that it should help the other writers to identify strengths and weaknesses. So there's constructive positive feedback, like you did this right, and I think this is really working in this section and you should do more of this. And then constructive quote-unquote negative feedback, which is where you say this is what's not working or these are the weaknesses and what needs to get better. So really they should be doing both of those things, offering constructive positive and negative feedback. The other thing about good peer review is it facilitates critical thinking. It means that you're encouraging other writers to dig deeper, ask more and better questions, and it should be specific. So no, oh, that was really good, or no, I liked it a lot. That's great, but that's not specific enough. So it should refer to specific things in the paper that are either really great and you should do more of this, or really need work and here's why. And also, good peer review is motivating. So you don't want to just crush each other, you know? You want everybody to leave that peer review session feeling kind of energized and having a plan in their head of where they want to go with the paper. So, a little more explanation about why it's counterproductive to fixate on grammar, formatting, APA style at this stage. By the way, if you're teaching a course, I would also say that that's true for for instructor feedback, that, you know, even if the grammar is really problematic, you getting in there and line editing people's grammar is not going to teach them anything. That doesn't teach them, they're just going to go in and apply, you know, accept all your track changes, and they're not going to learn a thing. So it's really counterproductive to fixate on that. Ideas are more important. Organization, flow of ideas is more important. And if you're going to go in as a peer reviewer and like clean up somebody's grammar, and then later on they realize that they don't even want a whole section, like you've just wasted everybody's time reworking a paragraph or a section that's not even going to be in the final draft. Grammar and mechanics are for a later stage when you're getting ready to turn that paper in. And that's really the difference between revision and editing or proofreading. What we want to do at this stage is revise the work, meaning we're in the ideas stage, we're in the invention stage, the creative stage, not nitpicky APA style citations are wrong and this comma's in the wrong place kind of stage. That's later. It also approaches feedback when you're just focusing on grammar and mechanics. It tends to have you approaching feedback as error correction. And that's really not what revision is. It shouldn't be about just finding mistakes and correcting them. And the interesting thing about that is there's a mountain of research to support this. One study in particular that the name of the authors escaped me at this moment, but it's kind of a classic study that most sentence level errors, and I'm talking about like 85+%, meaning little errors in grammar and syntax and stuff, most of those will self-correct with careful enough proofreading. So really, we should be encouraging each other to read our work out loud or have it read to them so that they can hear how the grammar sounds, and to do careful proofreading, and that stuff is going to work itself out. So it's really not necessary to do it in a peer review situation. And if you allow them to do it, it's all they'll want to do because it's the easiest thing to do. So don't do it. No grammar and mechanics editing. So what are some strategies for using peer feedback in your classrooms? Or even in just like if you're a student and you're in like a writing group with other students, which is a terrific idea. So strategies for using feedback: clarify the skills necessary. So if you are directing your students to do this, you need to make sure they understand what to do and what not to do. Help them see peer review as part of the writing process, that, you know, eventually this is going to be seen ideally by a real audience, not just by a teacher, not just by one person, but by a real diverse audience of people coming to it from all different angles with their own preconceptions and their own questions and their own expectations. And peer review really helps them to understand that. And communicate to them that a peer reviewer is not a grader, but a reader, just a reader like anybody else. If they publish this is just a reader reaction, and that's worth its weight in diamonds to a writer. So some basic tips for using peer feedback, for more constructive peer feedback. Obviously, first and foremost, guide them in doing it. I like to give students a peer review worksheet. I've developed a couple of those. Other people have developed those. There are some great examples online, and I'll show in a few moments an example or two of some peer review worksheets that you can give to your students. And it's also really important to discuss this with them. So what's constructive and what's unconstructive in class before they do the review. Don't assume that people know how to do it or that they've done it before, or that they've ever done it right. Take the time to discuss it in class. It shouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes. And it's good to assign peer review groups or pairs and keep the same ones all semester. That way people kind of get used to each other and they get more comfortable with each other and the awkwardness dissipates and people can get really honest with each other by the end of the semester, you know? It's a good idea if you can to avoid putting really close friends together because they might be tempted to be a little bit too forgiving and too nice with each other. Encourage students to let you know if their peer reviews are not going well. So if they're not getting anything constructive, have them let you know that. And they can do that in confidence or whatever, but it's really important for them to let you know if it's not going well. And then focus on finding ways to help them improve, you know, if you can, rather than assigning them to a new group, unless it's really going south, and then you can just go ahead and reassign them. So some basic tips for using peer feedback continued. For more, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. I lost my place. I thought I'd gone back a slide accidentally. So continuing with constructive feedback tips. So as the instructor, you can kind of hover and be there to coach and observe. If you hear a student say something like, well, I got confused on page 3 of your paper, and then they don't elaborate, you can say, okay, so can you show Mary where you got confused? And kind of prod a little bit. If you hear a student saying, well, your paper was really good, you can prompt them to, okay, can you be more specific? What was good about it? And just kind of, you know, circulate around. And you can do this in a Zoom meeting as well. You can go into the breakout rooms or whatever. You might find that, especially early in the process, students may finish early. They might just, you know, be done in 20 minutes and you've allotted them the whole hour, and they might need some prodding along. And that's your job as the instructor. And then afterwards, it's a good idea to have a debrief. So talk about what the groups did right. Talk about what individual reviewers did right. If you really witnessed some really good quality peer review, highlight that. Say, these guys did a great job, and here's why. That obviously is going to work best face-to-face. And by face-to-face, I include Zoom, obviously. But if that's not doable, then you can make a course announcement in your Canvas or whatever, discuss it via discussion board. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can adapt this to an online situation if you have to. So continuing on, review the peer review worksheets now and then. You don't necessarily have to do it every time, but it's good to run your eyes over those every now and again and look at what kinds of things students are saying to each other, that everybody's, you know, kind of getting the general idea about what's constructive and what's not. And encourage student input about how the peer review is going. And if you need to, you can go back again and either via Zoom, via a video or an announcement or a face-to-face meeting, you can review again what the difference between constructive and unconstructive is. One great thing you can do, and I know time is precious in these courses, but if you can review an excerpt from a sample paper together, and then everybody can kind of fill out their own peer review worksheet for the sample paper, or you can just discuss it as a class, whichever works. But I think that can be a terrific resource as well to look at an example. So everybody has to decide for themselves whether and how to grade peer feedback. A lot of times I'll just make it just an either pass fail, like you either did it or you didn't. If you completely phoned it in, then that counts as you didn't do it. You know, an example, did they bring their 2 copies of the paper to class? Then if they did, they get 5 points. Did they provide peers with specific constructive written feedback? That's 0 to 5 points. Participated actively in discussion of each paper? 0 to 5 points. Wrote specific response to peers' feedback? 0 to 5 points. And then that could be like a 0 to 20 point assignment. That's just one example for how you might do it. There's many other ways you can do it as well. Whether you grade the peer feedback or not, have students turn in their completed worksheets with their final drafts. Then, when you're grading that final draft, you can see how that peer feedback informed that final draft and see, you know, what kinds of changes they made as a result of it. It can give you a really good idea of whether it's working or not. And I love doing this. Consider having your students respond in writing to their peer feedback. This can be great for instructor feedback too. When I used to teach freshman comp, I would always have my students respond to my feedback. Not necessarily everything I said, but it's like you have to pick 3 things and respond to them, you know, from the instructor feedback. And then if it's a draft, you can ask them for a revision plan. Now, this does not have to be extensive at all. It could be a few sentences, but just based on what your peers have told you, what's your plan for revision? What do you plan on working on, changing, etc.? And you can consider making reviews anonymous. Now, there are pros and cons to this. Students may be more honest if you do this, but also it makes it kind of tough to work with the same groups every time and everything. But Canvas, it's important to note, does actually have a feature where you can do this, which is kind of cool. And I have used it before, and it's neat. It blinds the reviews, which is very cool, I think.